If you're on a tight budget, you'll be looking at older and higher mileage four-wheel drives. And all of those factors just means more risk for you. In this video, we're going to show you how not to get ripped off when buying your next budget 4x4. The biggest mistake you can make when buying a cheap 4x4 is buying one that was used for serious off-roading. I know that sounds a little bit silly, but off-roading is really hard on vehicles, and it can lead to a lot of hidden problems that could end up costing you thousands to fix. Instead, the best 4x4 to buy is the mall cruiser. It's the car that was used to buy groceries and take the kids to school. It's the one that every hardcore 4x4 person makes fun of. Since used car sellers are about as honest as, well, a used car salesman, it might not be obvious that the vehicle you're looking at has been used for serious off-roading. But don't worry, we've got you covered, and we're going to show you some easy ways to check for signs of off-road abuse. The easiest place to start is by looking at the front and rear bumpers. What we're looking for here is scrapes or cracks that would indicate that the car has bottomed out. So if it went through a ditch, for example, and it just didn't have enough clearance either at the front or the back. The next step is to take a look at the edges of the car. And here we're looking for any big dents or scratches that would indicate that it's kind of scraped along some rocks or just generally had some hard bumps on the edges. Essentially anything that wouldn't happen in a mall parking lot. That's the damage you're looking for. Lastly, make sure you've got a flashlight and check the underside of the vehicle to see if there's any damage there. I would focus on looking at the skid plates and also the differential, as these are the areas that are most likely to take a beating during off-roading. What you're looking for here is, again, dents and deep scratches that would indicate that the car has bottomed out or scraped along the ground. Since you're underneath the car, you should also look closely at the frame of the vehicle. By the time you've added camping equipment, not to mention a truck camper, it's really easy to overload your car. And if somebody did overload their 4x4 and then went off-roading, they could easily have caused damage to the frame. If the vehicle you're looking at has been modified with a suspension lift or really big tires, you want to make sure that it's all been properly approved if your country requires it. I would also be cautious about really big suspension lifts, and I'm talking 2 inches plus here, as these can be a recipe for disaster if they weren't developed properly and then installed by a professional company, just because there's a lot more moving parts involved. At the end of the day, if the 4x4 you're thinking of buying looks like this, I would give it a big miss. Now that we've looked for 4x4 damage, it's time to look for the next biggest car killer, and that is rust. Obviously, northern climates are going to see the worst rust, but just because you live in a southern climate does not mean that you're out of the woods. Since you're buying a 4x4, it could easily have been driven on the beach or spent a lot of time in a coastal environment. If the owner didn't wash the car after a day of beach driving, then the salt and sand mixture will continue to sit there and cause rust. Before we put on our Sherlock Holmes hat and start inspecting every single angle of the vehicle, make sure you hit that subscribe button for more helpful tips that'll help you save both time and money. We're going to start a rust inspection around the wheel wells. That's usually the worst spot because it's where all the salt gets kicked up from the tires. Start by doing a visual inspection on the outside and then shine your flashlight on the inside. Even if you don't see the rust coming through, you might see some bubbles in the paint, and that's a sign that there's rust underneath. If there are plastic wheel well arches, try and look in the seams for signs of rust. You can also push on them a little bit to see if there's a crunchy noise or if any brown debris falls out. If that is the case, then there's rust behind the plastic trim. Next up, let's take a look at the hood. This is another place that can easily get rock chips and start to rust, especially if you live in a climate where they use rock salt on the roads like Canada or the northern US. Once you've inspected all the exterior panels, take a look around the taillights and anywhere that water might sit and be hard to wash away. This includes the very top of the windshield, along with the edges of where the trunk sits. Next up, we're going to take a look at the frame. Most 4x4s are going to be what's called body on frame. This frame is really critical as it's essentially the spine of the vehicle. If the frame looks good, as in there's no major rust on it, a little bit of surface rust is okay, but if there's anything that looks like it's actually gone through the frame, then forget it. If the frame looks good, then you want to take a look at any hangers or bolts and make sure that they're not rusted out, as those could break at a very inconvenient time. We actually had that exact thing happen to us on an F-150 that we bought from Northern Alberta, and we ended up having to replace the drivetrain just because the bracket that held it up rusted out and broke, which obviously caused the drivetrain to drop down and break. If you've got any questions about buying a used 4x4, then make sure you leave your questions in the comments below, and I'll try to answer every single one of them. Now that your vehicle has passed your rust inspection, it's time to take a look at the tires. The first place to start is by looking at the tire tread. Essentially, we're trying to see how much life is left on the tires that are on the vehicle. One way to do this is by using the good old penny trick. Basically, put the penny inside the tire tread. If you can see the top of Lincoln's head, then there's not enough tread. Obviously, that doesn't tell you exactly how much tire tread is left, it just tells you whether there's not enough left. So to get the most accurate measurement, you'll need to buy a tire tread checker, which we've got linked in the description below. Apart from the tire tread, you also want to take a look for just general cracks and bulges. The bulges are usually going to happen somewhere around the sidewall, and that's just an indication that the tire has hit a really big pothole or a big rock. The other thing to look out for is how old the tire is. You could rely on the seller's honesty, but a better way is to check the DOT number. Every modern tire will have this, and you can normally find it along the rim of the tire. Another thing to look out for is that the tires are actually rated correctly for the vehicle. Since we're talking about a 4x4, the biggest factor is probably going to be weight. This number does follow a code, and you can look it up online. In the case of this vehicle, it's rated at 112S. So 112, this is your weight rating number, and S is your speed number. When you look it up online and you look at the tables, you need to make sure that all 4 tires together, or 6 tires, if you're looking at a dually, add up to a number that's equal to or higher than the vehicle's GVW. That's the gross vehicle weight. Another thing to look out for when it comes to the tires is that all 4 tires match. Legally, as long as the tires are the exact same on each axle, you're okay. But I find it a bit odd and usually a sign of someone being cheap if all 4 tires don't match. So for me, that would be a warning sign. If the vehicle has passed all your inspections so far, then it's time to pop the hood and take a look at the engine. Don't worry, you really don't have to be a mechanic for this step. We're just trying to look for anything obvious that's a warning sign. When it comes to this step, I like to work my way from the front to the back, but it's really your choice. Starting at the front, we're going to look at the radiator, and we want to make sure, again from a visual inspection, that it's not cracked or has any major damage to it. Next up, we want to take a look at the top of the radiator. If it's plastic, like this one is, then you're looking for signs that the plastic has melted, or if it's deformed in any sort of way. If you've ever melted a Tupperware in the microwave, you'll know what I'm talking about. In this case, it looks good. Next up, we're going to take a look at the fan. Again, we're just looking for any signs of damage to the fan, or if it's cracked or loose. Again, you don't have to be a mechanic to check this. Working away from the front to back, let's take a look at the hoses. We'll start with this hose. It's a nice big hose. It's a rubber hose, so we want to make sure that it still feels supple and that it's not cracked or dry. You also want to make sure that the connections are tight. We're going to give it a little tug. Don't worry, a little tug won't make it come off. And just tug both ends. This all looks good. Then move your way back and just look for any other hoses that you can see and just check them to make sure that they're not dry, brittle, or falling apart. And again, make sure that all your connections are tight. So in this case, everything looks good. You can also take a look at the belts. Every engine is going to be different in terms of how many belts it has, but for the sake of this, it doesn't matter. However many belts you see, give a look at them, give them a tug. Again, make sure that they don't feel dry, loose, or that there's any visible cracks. It's pretty simple. The next step, and perhaps the most critical, is to take a look for any signs of leaks. Now, an engine can leak from anywhere, realistically, but there's a few common spots that I would look for. On this engine, for example, we're going to try to look for any seams. And that's where the oil has the potential to come out of. You can have seams on the top and you'll probably have some seams on the bottom. Oil can leak out of both places. Again, what you're looking for here is any signs of glistening or any moisture. Those are all potential warning signs of an oil leak. Now, an oil leak can be serious or it can be minor. And again, since we're looking at budget 4x4s, you may see some symptoms of an oil leak. But if everything else checks out in the vehicle, I wouldn't necessarily dismiss it just because of that, at least until you've had it mechanically inspected, and then they can tell you whether you should be concerned about it or not. Your next step is to check the fluids. If you go to an oil change shop, they'll probably put a little line on your invoice saying, checked and filled fluids. And that sounds really fancy, but it's not. All we're doing is checking the coolant level, which in this case is in this little box here. It's just a visual inspection. Let's take a look in the coolant box. You want to make sure that the level is between minimum and maximum. Again, in this case, it is. Happy days. If the coolant level is too low and it's below the minimum mark, then that is a sign that the engine could have been overheating. And in that case, I would really just avoid that car completely. The next fluid to check is your wiper fluid. Obviously, unless you're driving in the middle of an Alberta winter, then it's not a huge deal if you run out. But I would say that if an owner is selling a car and they haven't even bothered to refill the wiper fluid, well, then maybe that speaks to how the whole vehicle has been cared for. Again, this is very simple to check. The reservoir might be in different places depending on the vehicle, but you're just looking for the top of the cap that says washer fluid only, and then you're going to follow the pipe down just to see what the level is. The last step of your underhood inspection is to do an oil inspection. Don't worry, this is not as complicated as it sounds. All you got to do is pull out a stick and check the oil. So, to start off, find the oil dipstick and pull it out. Then give it a wipe and stick it back in. Make sure it goes all the way back in until it's fully in, otherwise you won't get an accurate reading. Then pull it out. Now we can check to see what the oil level is. So, what we're looking for is a level between minimum to maximum. And every oil dipstick will look different. So in this case, we can see we're still above minimum, but it could probably do with an oil top up. Next, look at the color. The color ideally should be a very light amber color. In this case, you can see it's a little bit darker than that, but in all fairness, we're only about 500 kilometers away from our next oil change. So that makes sense. If the oil level is below minimum, or if the oil has turned a creamy color, those are bad signs. If the color of the oil is just dark or very dark, but it's still brown, well, that could be an indication that the oil changes have been missed. Now it's time to complete your interior inspection. Again, bear in mind you're shopping for a budget 4x4, so don't expect a new car. What we're really looking for here are mainly deal breakers or something that's just so ugly that you can't live with it. Speaking of ugly, let's talk about the dashboard. If you're shopping for a vehicle in a really hot climate, then that's an area you really have to pay attention to. For example, some of the Nissan Patrols, the dashboard plastic will literally melt and bubble up. It looks horrific. Technically, it's not structural, but it looks awful. And it's really expensive to replace, so for me, that would probably be a deal breaker. Another thing to look out for is just general cracks or anything like that in the dash that can be caused from the relentless sun. Apart from the dash, another area that's going to get a lot of abuse is obviously the seats. For the seats, you want to take a look at the seat fabric. Is all the seat fabric in good condition? Are there any rips and tears? Again, this is something that can be fixed, but depending on what country you're in, it's probably relatively expensive to get seats upholstered. Speaking of seats, you also want to check that the cushioning in the seat hasn't completely collapsed. The best way to do this is to actually take a seat. If you can feel springs poking up your butt, well, then the cushioning has seen better days and it's probably time to replace it. Again, if you're on a budget, that's probably not something you want to do. Another area that you can look for is the steering wheel. The steering wheel is inevitably going to get a lot of use, but the good news is that you can always just put a steering wheel cover on it like we did on this one. So as long as there's no big cracks or anything like that that's really structural, you can just cover it up. Since we're on the inside, this is also a good time to make sure that everything electronic works. Turn the ignition on and test everything. And I mean every single turn signal, low beams, high beams. If they have any spot beams that they've installed, make sure that they work. Also, if you see an aftermarket infotainment unit like our Prado has, make sure it works. If they've installed a backup camera, make sure it works. This is all really basic stuff, but if any accessories that have been installed don't work, then it could be a sign that either it was a really bad DIY job or that some connection somewhere has broken loose. And anything to do with electronics is always very expensive to diagnose. The next step, and really the final step on your inspection journey, is to take the vehicle for a test drive. What you're looking for in the test drive is really anything obvious. When you're driving along, try to listen out for any squeaks or rattles that might be coming from the suspension. You also want to try to feel if there's any excess vibration in the steering wheel. And I'm talking real excess here, like if it's vibrating like that, that's not a good sign. You also want to take a feel for whether the steering wheel is being tugged to one side or the other. These are all signs of either steering component failure or suspension component failure. None of these are good things if you're on a budget, or really at any time. When you're driving along, and let's say you hit a small pothole or you drive over a speed bump, you shouldn't hear a clunk coming from the suspension. If you hear that, well, that's a sign that something has worn out. Another thing that you can feel for with a suspension is whether it settles again quickly. When you go over a speed bump, obviously there's going to be some motion, but it shouldn't just keep rocking like an old 70s sedan. If it does that, again, there's a chance that there's a suspension component problem. You also want to feel for how the engine is delivering its power. This is really hard to tell you what to look out for because every model and every engine is going to have a different feel and a different level of performance. For example, if you test drive an 80 series Land Cruiser, those things are really heavy and pretty sluggish in their power delivery. On the other hand, if you're looking at a modern turbocharged petrol engine, well, those might be pretty peppy. Speaking of power, I also recommend that you try to find a hill wherever you are taking a test drive. The reason for this is that it's going to give you a chance to listen to how the transmission shifts and how the engine sounds when it's being put under a little bit of extra load. When it comes to the transmission, if it's an automatic transmission, you want to make sure that you don't hear any clunking or any hard shifts. These are all signs of either missed maintenance or a bigger problem with the transmission. If you're test driving a manual transmission, you want to make sure that the clutch is smooth and that you can shift the gears smoothly as well, again without any big clunking sounds as you shift into gear. Unless, of course, you messed up the clutch, but then that's your own fault. If everything went well on your test drive, the vehicle handles well, it drives well, there's no funny sounds, then you want to test that the 4x4 system on the vehicle works. Obviously, you're not going to take the vehicle off-roading, but even if you're just parked somewhere, you can still take it through the different 4x4 modes and make sure that it actually shifts into them. On this Prado, for example, it's a little manual shifter that you have to move to get into the different 4x4 modes. On some of the newer vehicles, it's all electronics and it's a little shifter knob. I would really recommend that you ask the seller how this works, and if they don't know, then check the manual. Because there might be different rules and different sequences that you have to follow in order to not cause any damage to the 4x4 system. For example, on this Prado, with the automatic transmission, you have to be in neutral and stopped before you can change the 4x4 modes. If you don't, you could cause issues. If your test drive went really well, everything works great, and you think you might be in love with the car, the next step is to do a gut check. How does the car make you feel? Do you get a good feeling about it? Do you think that this could be a great partner for all your future adventures? Or do you like it on paper, but something just seems off? And you just have a nagging feeling that you can't explain or justify. The good news is, if you have any sort of doubt, if you have any sort of nagging feeling that something is off with the seller or something is off with the vehicle, just walk away. You haven't made a commitment to buy the car at this point at all. So, bad feeling equals walk away. If the vehicle you're looking at has passed all your inspections and, most importantly, your gut check, then it's time to get the vehicle inspected by a professional mechanic. You're getting them to look for anything that would be a deal breaker. So if they find a broken light bulb that costs $10 to fix, or something else that's, $20, $50, I really wouldn't worry about it too much. But obviously, if they find a major issue, such as a head gasket leak or some sort of other leak in the engine, that's going to require really anything more than $100 or $200 to fix, well, then you should probably just go back to the seller and renegotiate your price. For more brutally honest and helpful tips that'll help you save both time and money, make sure you check out our latest video right here.